So Mayor Emanuel says there's just no fairness in giving retirees and their pensions a 3% pay raise every year, Anders Lindall, when the actual workers and the taxpayers are often getting zero or even furloughs.
Well, let's understand what we're talking about when you say retirees get a pay raise.
3%.
Teachers,
that
nurses,
means that
firefighters, caregivers.
Their pension doubles every 21 years.
It means that they pay in to their pension from every check. And when they retire, they have a guarantee of some dignity in retirement. And for most of them, they don't have Social Security to fall back on like you and I. So the modest pension that they earn and that they themselves pay significantly toward is their primary source of income in retirement.
Because the benefits they've earned are absolutely guaranteed. It's a simple matter of contract law. What we're talking about is, what the mayor's talking about, is amending the state constitution going forward to reduce that burden. He says we're going to be paying $42 billion over the next few decades for this 3%.
What the 3% is designed to do is to keep that modest pension, which is about $35,000 a year on average. And again, talking about a city of Chicago worker, they don't have Social Security, living on $35,000.
Okay. But inflation has not been at 3% for the last decade.
If you look at just about any 20-year period since it was created, 3% is a very accurate proxy. The Social Security COLA this year is almost 3%.
Okay, so Ted Dabrowski, why is this immoral?
Well, Rahm Emanuel, is interesting that he used the word progressive several times. That it's not a progressive. It's not progressive to do this. And when you think about it, these retirees are getting guaranteed 3% compounded COLAs for the rest of their lives.
Well, it doubles every couple decades.
Right. So your pension, you'll actually make much more in retirement than you ever did while you were working. And it's just not fair when you think about people struggling in Illinois. You talked about 300,000 manufacturing jobs have been lost. You're talking about people who don't get raises, who are getting furloughed, who are losing jobs. And here we are giving guaranteed increases to people. So we need to bring it back to what taxpayers can afford, and that's something that's really unaffordable.
When the state pension cuts were challenged in court, the Supreme Court said that both the pension clause and the contract clause preclude this. And so even if you were to change the Constitution, which I believe is immoral, it's unfair, and I don't believe it will ever happen, given that voters are going to reject taking money away from retired public service workers. But even if it did,
we're not taking money away. Let's be clear. We're not taking money away. We're diminishing the earning of future benefits. So we're not taking money that's been earned.
This has been litigated, and it is settled law in unanimous decisions of the state Supreme Court. The only thing that can try to defeat the contract clause is a police powers argument that we have an emergency and it's really sad, but we need to take this money away. Yes, it is. And that has already been rejected. It has already failed. We should not devote any more years, any more time, any more money towards
where does the money come
these
from?
schemes.
So where does this untold $140 billion come from?
We need to look at a range of options. The mayor put out a couple with respect to revenue from casino gaming, with respect to revenue from legalized recreational marijuana.
That's a drop in the bucket.
He also talked about pension bonds that would enable an infusion of revenue up front in exchange for predictable payments on the backside, and maybe there would be some savings on interest to be had there as well. We can look at re-amortizing like you would refinance
so in other words, stretch the ramp.
Home loan.
So stretch the ramp out.
The problem is a funding problem. It is not a benefit problem, and it has never been a benefit problem. The cost of that $35,000 a year to the employer, to the city, to the state, it's actually less than paying into Social Security.
If I can jump in here, Anders represents about, I don't know, 50,000 AFSCME members. So he is
100,000
AFSCME members. So he represents a relatively small part of the population of Illinois, but he represents the unions and these benefits that are guaranteed by the Constitution to date. He doesn't represent the average Illinoisan. The private sector, nobody gets guaranteed contracts. Anders argues for a guaranteed contract, not just labor contracts, but also the constitutional protections. Nobody gets that. Free retiree health care. Nobody gets that in the private sector. So what we've done is we've done
I'm not
something
aware
where
of anyone who has free retiree health care, and in fact, city employees don't have
well,
retiree health care at all.
I'm talking about AFSCME
Well,
employees.
after 20 years,
City employees do not have retiree health
The
But
care
state
after
of
20
Florida.
years, state employees pay zip.
Zero.
We're
There are
talking about the
co-pays.
city of
They pay no
Chicago.
Right now I'm
premiums.
talking about AFSCME.
Okay,
So
you're
my
gonna change
point is
the
that well, it's the same subject. So what's happening is you've got these contracts and guarantees, and somebody needs to start defending the taxpayer. Now, what's interesting is that Rahm
Public
Emanuel,
service workers pay taxes, too.
See, I didn't interrupt you. Rahm Emanuel.
Can you admit that public service workers pay taxes too?
Well, everybody pays taxes, but who's the beneficiary of the benefits, Anders? That's the question.
The public benefits from the services that we
So-
provide. My kids go to
Let's
Chicago
let
Public
'em.
School. I ride the Chicago train and the bus.
Okay.
And I
so-
pay
Anders,
taxes to support it.
you represent the unions. You're funded by the unions. Let's make that clear.
I represent working people
somebody
who
needs
serve
to
the public.
Somebody needs to represent the taxpayers and say, hey, and Rahm Emanuel, interestingly enough, said something, it's not progressive to give somebody else a guaranteed benefit when others don't. Now, why Rahm didn't take that further and talk about all kinds of other benefits he could have, like the multi-million-dollar pensions that many, many people get. But it is we need taxpayer advocates, because if not, Illinois keeps losing
All right, so
its people.
what's your solution? We're talking about huge tax increases,
Oh,
one way or the other.
well, we'd certainly like to avoid them, because tax increases may not be workable if people leave.
Okay, but without any of the sorts of cuts that we're talking about, Anders is certainly, we're talking, I mean, the cannabis, and even if we get a Vegas-style casino making a large profit, that's just a drop in the bucket for the $140 billion in unfunded pension liability.
And I agree with that. I think we need to look at things like making the 2/3 of Illinois corporations that pay no corporate income tax. Why shouldn't these corporations pay something? Why should a billionaire like Bruce Rauner pay a lower effective income tax rate than a working person?
Okay.
We need to raise the revenue that's needed, not just to pay our bills. Absolutely, we have to meet our obligations, but also to fund our schools, to pay for health care, to pay for public safety, and the other things that we do together.
So
as
What's
government.
interesting is you don't hear Anders ever talk about reforms to how we do things. We have a very dysfunctional state, and we know it across the board. It doesn't matter. You have all these overlapping governments that are taxing the heck out of people. Anders doesn't talk about that. The only thing he will bring up is we need more tax revenues, as if taxpayers are ATMs.
Obviously, that's not what I said at all. I laid out a number of ideas that we could look at.
They were all revenue generating.
But it would be interesting if there was as much thought devoted to how to solve the real problem, which is a funding problem, a failure of the politicians over decades to pay an actuarially responsible amount into the pension funds. If there was as much money devoted to solving the real funding problem as there is to trying to trick and fool and frustrate the Constitution and state and federal law that protects the life savings of public service workers, and that's what a
All right,
modest
15
pension
seconds,
is.
Ted.
Well,
Wrap it up.
very
15
interesting.
seconds.
Anders says that there was not enough funding. If you look for the unions and where they were during the Chicago pension holidays, you will not find them, because they were okay with the money not going into pensions, because they were going into salaries and other benefits.
Yeah, I
So-
remember Henry Bear, your old boss,
where were they?
signed
signed
a witness slip in favor of one of the budgets that took the holiday. But anyway, listen, gentlemen, thanks for coming in. Up next, an excellent idea for your Christmas gift list.